Hey Podcast Babe, welcome to season 9 of the Podcast Babes podcast. My name is Anna Klasse, host of this pod and founder of the Podcast Babes. Every week, I interview and inspire a female podcaster here who has made her podcast work for her and her business. So tune in to learn from her mistakes, create your own profitable podcast. Here's today's episode. Hey Podcast Babes, welcome to a new episode. Today I'm here with Katya Allison. She is a highly regarded marketing professional, lots of experience in marketing and also in podcasting. She's had different podcasts before, and at the moment she hosts the Let's Talk Marketing podcast. I'm really excited to have you on the show today, Katya, because you have so much experience about podcasting, and you already mentioned that you have a lot of opinions about it too. So I'm super excited to dive in. Welcome to the show, first of all.
Thank you so much for having me on here. I'm excited to dive into all of the conversations and the rabbit holes that we're going to end up going down.
Sounds good. So to kick us off, can you tell me a little bit more about your work as a marketing professional? What does that mean exactly? Yeah. What do you specialize in a certain marketing channel type, or do you do all the different overall marketing strategies? Tell me more.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am going to describe just kind of my marketing experience. And I hate this word, but it's probably the best description, right? So I would consider myself a marketing generalist, which means that I'm a utility marketer is probably the best way to articulate it, right? You can punch me into any place and I know about all areas of it so that I can make those connections and we can collaborate and make effective strategies. That's demand gen, that's branding, that's, content marketing in between that, that's social, that's influencer. So all kind of aspects of it. Now, that being said, sometimes I think that like generalist gets kind of like this, it's a bad word because that means, oh, so you don't really know a lot about anything. I actually know a lot about many of the things. And when I talk about it, I always say, my sweet spot, if I had to be an individual contributor tomorrow, where I sit in a marketing organization that I just kind of love, that is really just more of my jam, is the content marketing, the community, the branding, and also for the product marketing side of it. Now, I think that as a generalist, what makes me a powerhouse in marketing, well, talk about tooting my own horn, right? But what makes me a powerhouse is that I know all aspects of it. So I know how to take that content and give it to the demand gen team so that we can actually get leads into the funnel and then identify the right content to move them down the funnel as well too, and how to leverage both sides of just kind of a marketing organization.
Exactly. You really have that overview of what different types of marketing are needed to really go from A to Z. That's awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Amazing. And at what point did a podcast enter your own marketing mix? Or was it a marketing channel for you when you started, or was it a completely separate thing?
It is a blessing in disguise, and it's thank you COVID is really where it came out of. The company that I was with, we during COVID, obviously, well, not just we, everybody, the whole world went indoors, right? So we all turned to work from home, and then we had to really identify what's that quick pivot. How can we still remain connected with our customers? We started a webinar series that I hosted as well too. And another aspect was a podcast. And when we first started with the podcast, I would probably articulate it as a little haphazard. There was no real like direction as that we wanted to take it, but we wanted to start a podcast. I feel like there are a lot of people who are like, I really want to start a podcast, and they think that they can just get on the microphone and there's no strategy. I mean, I think even the well thought out conversations are what we see just out there natively nowadays for podcasts. There's thought that comes down to it, and there's chemistry that has to happen, right? So I took it on, and the idea was, it's called Grin Gets Real, or it was called Grin Gets Real. We did that for almost 2 years. And what we did was we brought on experts. We brought on experts in the influencer marketing space, and it was a conversation. There was definitely a format to it. I enjoy conversation. I also enjoy learning. And what I found at the end of the day was that this is such a great way to keep up with the trends, to learn things, to stay out there. From a content marketing perspective, it definitely fuels SEO if you can leverage it and amplify it in the best way possible. If you're a brand, it's great because, again, from an SEO value, it's fantastic. 'Cause you can put it on your website, but you can also put some paid behind it as well too, and it gives you the ability to show yourself as a thought leader. Now that's the business side of it. At the end of the day, the company evaluated, like, they were making some cuts, and the podcast was one of the things that got cut. The way that it goes with podcasts, you build up like a repository. And I was working with these really great content producers, and yeah, I was working with these really great content producers. And when I told them that we were canceling the show, they were like, okay. A week went by, and then they called me up and they're like, we'd love to be able to get you your podcast, your own podcast. And these are things that have been percolating in my head anyways. I enjoy all of these things. I found my passion for it. I'm doing a branded podcast, and as soon as they were like, We'd love to host a podcast for you, like, take some time to think about it." I was like, "I don't have to think about it. I know exactly what I wanna call it. I know exactly
Yeah.
when I wanna drop it, and I know exactly the format." And that's just kind of how Let's Talk Marketing came oh my goodness, Let's Talk Marketing came to be. I've just finished my 1st season. We've just launched the 2nd season, and I think I mean, like, I'm in it here for the long haul. I'm all about it. Like, it's such a great tool from a marketing perspective, a little undervalued from a business perspective, but for my personal brand as well too, I love it.
Very cool. That's amazing. And so valuable that you could have that whole learning experience
Yeah.
while you were with this company and to do this branded podcast with them. I think that's also such a cool way to see if it is something for you, right? You didn't have
Yeah.
to dive in and do all the things like invest so much time, get the equipment and anything like that because you've
Yeah.
you've already had that experience. So that's so cool. And how did you make your own podcast once you were in charge? Was it very different from the branded podcast, or and if yes, like what changes did you make?
So I think, the biggest difference from the branded podcast to my own personal podcast is freedom is one. So being okay with being a little messy as far as like not everything has to be perfect. Being able to say yes to guests is also a big thing. And I think it's also the format, like the structure. So I believe that every podcast kind of has a formula, right? Like we got onto this call and you're
Yeah.
like, this is going to be very conversational. I love conversational podcasts, but you have to ultimately think what is the goal that we want. So for from the branded perspective, the goal was let's connect with the brands that we want to be able to talk to, right? So it was very strategic, like let's make those inroads, right? For me, it was more of like, I want to continue to learn. I have a growth mindset. I love marketing. It's called Let's Talk Marketing for a reason because I love to talk about it. So, like, for me, I started with like my ultimate goal. I want someone to listen and to be able to take away insights. But what I also realized is that not everybody maybe like let's say the strategy that we're talking about this week is going to be SEO. Maybe that's not something that you're going to tune into. So how can I be able to provide value to a listener? And as long as they walk away with one insight, to me that's a check off. Like I've done what I want to be able to do. So what I did was I created a structure so that people would at least gain insight from learning what that marketer, like where that marketer started and where they're at, how they keep up with the trends, the actual strategy that we're talking about for that particular episode, and maybe just kind of learned lessons. So for me, the biggest difference is I structured it so that people could get insights from it. And I believe that everybody, especially marketers, have something to be able to share. There's lots of learned lessons. There's a lot of journeys. Like to be a marketer is not a straight line. We wish
Oh
it
yeah.
was, but it's not, right? So like for me, those are the liberties that I was able to like take away and also just kind of experiment with it. What do I want to do this year? Like last year, what I really wanted to do is this is my own podcast. I want to do it for a year and I want to post every single week. I want a weekly podcast, which is a
That's a big
beast.
goal. Yeah.
It was a beast. And obviously there were some holiday breaks and, stuff that's happening in the world where you are cognizant of needing to take a break from it. Um, so it's starting with like what is my personal goal for this podcast this year? And that's what I achieved last year, right? This year I took a look at it. I'm like, what do I want to do? I want to get a little bit more creative. After a year of doing it, your rhythm is different. Your questions are different. Like what's resonating with my audience, what's not resonating with my audience. How
You
else
have
can
that
I
data
amplify
now.
this? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have that data now. Exactly. So there you can be much more strategic with a podcast after you've done it for a year. And I got really great advice from someone that I had interviewed, Neil Schaefer. He said, do it for a year. Do it for a year. Don't think about don't think about monetizing. Don't think about like do it for a year. You're gonna learn so much from that year that then you are gonna be able to build on it and know what you want to be able to do.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is absolutely great advice. And I think you need some time to get that data so that you can then make those smart decisions for year two. Absolutely. And I love that you said like the freedom to just be creative is the next thing. Like it was
Yeah.
already probably a step going from a branded podcast where you would have to follow their formula of course, and everything
Yeah.
had to be perfect, to then taking a step towards freedom where you could have your own format and your own questions and stuff like that. So then now next step to even more creativity and freedom. That sounds
Absolutely.
amazing. Sounds like that's a really important value for your podcast and your brand, your personal brand as well.
Absolutely. Like, I think that people have to be able to show up authentically, and you have to be able to give them the room to do that, right? And my goal is for every guest to come on here to be able to share their knowledge. And I don't want to be worried about what their titles are. And I think that sometimes when you work for a brand and you're executing a podcast, it can be about like, oh, no, I want that big company A, and I need to get the CMO. There's a lot of learnings from every aspect of a marketing org. And I like to be able to uncover that and have just kind of fun conversations. And it's exciting to get on the line with someone who has thoughts, opinions, who can get on their soapbox and be passionate about what they're passionate about. And have us
Yes.
give us a better understanding of why. And I tell you, I continue to learn in every single episode. And there is something that I take away that I leverage as a marketer in like my day to day.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned that you have strong opinions about podcasts, which I love, but I want to hear them. Tell me your opinions about podcasts. And are there also things that you don't like about podcasts or that you see that people are doing and that's just not working, in your opinion or in your experience?
I think, I don't typically start with a negative, but I'm going to start with a bit of a negative here. I think that the thought that you want to start a podcast as a business or personal, I want to be able to support anybody who says that. But like I think that one of the challenges is people thinking that it is easy. And it's not that it's difficult, but there are a lot of different steps that have to happen in order for you to be able to execute it. Now, can you do a quick and dirty? Absolutely. But I think there are a lot of podcasts that get started, and there are a lot of podcasts that don't continue because it does turn out to be a lot of work, whether you over edit or whether you don't over edit, right? To get the guest. I mean, you know this, to get a guest for that outreach, right? That outreach is one aspect of it. When they say yes, it's getting it scheduled, it's getting all of the back end set up. It's what do I even want to talk to them about? And now I have to tell them what I want to talk to them about. So, like, there are a lot of steps that it takes to it. So, sometimes I think like that's kind of like the frustrating part when I talk to people who are like, well, yeah, we should just start a podcast. Just start a podcast. You can, but there is more strategy that comes to it. Now, the value from podcasts, I think that you get from a business is so invaluable. It is a piece of content. Like I said, you have it on your website. It gives you the ability to be a thought leader in the space, whether it's your personal brand or like your company brand. So it gives you that ability. It does give you inroads to have conversations with people that you may not normally have the opportunity to actually do something like that. And then when you put some paid behind it, it's really great to be able to really amplify your brand. So I think that there are a ton of benefits that come from like executing on a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you can invest in creating really good content, like that first piece of content is if that is really good, if you can invest in some decent equipment, in some good editing, then that opens so many doors to repurposing that as well. And like you said, amplifying it
Yeah.
from there, right? There's so many possibilities that you have. And I think it's also what you mentioned. Yes, I think strategy is very important. And a lot of podcasters don't think that through when they start the podcast. But I also see that for many podcasters, when they start, is all new and exciting, and they're so excited to start. But then once the podcast is out there, they have a few episodes out there, it's kind of doing the same thing. And it's
Yeah.
not that exciting or sexy anymore, right? It's just like you just
It's a
keep
job.
going. Yeah, you just keep
Well, I mean,
going. And then
you're a
finding,
content creator. You're a content creator
yes,
afterwards. And
yeah,
it has taken me now 3 years to even look at myself as a content creator. To me, I was just hosting a podcast and having a really great conversation. But like you lose steam and there's work to be done to really again amplify it. I also think you're didn't start a podcast to be Joe Rogan. I'm not Joe Rogan. I don't have his
no,
audience. I don't have his appeal. I don't have his pull, and that's okay. And I think like it's being realistic with what you want to do from a podcast perspective is the thing. If your
yeah,
thing is once a month, I want to drop it once a month. If it's weekly, that's a lot of work. I feel it sometimes. It is a lot of work. I'm behind. There are a lot of like moving pieces. I want people to amplify it. But the beauty of it, and this is what I love about being in my own, is that I am holding myself accountable. I can do the things that I want to be able to do. So it has to be very much so. And I say this at the end of all my podcasts, it has to be grounded in reality.
yeah,
I love being able to support people who are dreamers, but it has to be grounded in reality, especially when it comes to like creating that podcast. And I think you have to think about like who is the audience that you're trying to serve, right? Like for me, I'm looking at the junior, mid, senior level marketers and entrepreneurs because those are the people that I have conversations with that I want to, decode marketing for is like that's my audience. Am I talking to senior leaders like who have been doing this, who are, part of like the big G's or like, you know what I mean? Part of those big consumer brands? No, I'm not really. And that's okay.
yeah.
Will it grow to that one day? Maybe. Not this year. That's not my goal. I just want to, amplify my YouTube. Like those are the things that I really want to be able to concentrate on.
Yeah, what I love about what you shared so far, and especially also now, like you have one clear goal for
Yeah.
this podcast season, for this year of podcasting, and that's what you're working towards. And I think that's really cool. And like your goal changed, right? For year one,
Yeah.
it was different than for year two, which is perfect because that means that you have a new goal now, which can make it
Yeah.
already more exciting, right? And then I think the
Yeah.
other part of that as well, like having that goal in mind, knowing why you're doing this, super important. And I think also just finding joy in creating the content. Like that's
Yeah.
what helped me personally so much that, you know, when I started my own podcast, at the start I was like, oh, like how many people are listening, like that was really like honestly that was really what was driving me at the start, that I was like, oh, I hope
Yeah.
more and more people will listen to this. And at some point I was like, you know what? I actually don't want to care about this. I actually just want
Yeah.
to have these amazing conversations. And if one person listens, great. Perfect. Because I had an amazing conversation. I met a new person. We talked about the
Yeah.
stuff that I love talking about. And yeah, it's also out there and it's out there forever. So, that's enough for me like now. And for me personally, that really helped as well. So I think that's also a little tip that I wanted to share with our audience today. Like find that joy.
Yeah, I love that tip, not to focus on the followers. I don't think that I've ever been focused on the followers. Like my mom listens. I know that she's not my only listener, but like and she gives me feedback all the time. I liked this episode. I didn't like this episode. It seems a little off the audio. She's got tips for days and I'm here for it. I love it. I love the fact that she's listening to it, Like
That's
my
cool.
son is my editor now, and the fact that he has thoughts and opinions about like the episodes that he's listening to, that kind of fuels me. So like I think it's you have to think about like the community that you're creating from it. And those people who provide feedback to you, that means a lot. Like that to me has been the fascinating thing, whether I have 1 million followers or 10 followers, right? Like it really, it kind of doesn't matter. So I love the fact that that's, one of the tips that you have. Don't focus on that because then you can get so obsessed with it, right? Like then it doesn't become about having the good conversation. It becomes about like, what do I want people to like do, take away with, and all of that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So I think actually the mix between what you said, having a clear goal and then also
Yeah.
enjoying the journey to get there, I think that's
Yeah.
honestly what's gonna really make a podcast great and make the content itself great, I would say. What else did you learn in your now, second podcast already? Is there anything that you wish you would have known when you started podcasting that you can share with our listeners today?
Anything that I have learned. I have learned that you need to automate as much as you can automate. There's a lot of repeated steps when it comes to executing on a podcast, and you want to make sure that you have the right system. And when it comes to workflows for creating a podcast, there are buckets of workflows that you need to create, right? There is the outreach. How am I going to get my guest? And I would advise people create templates. You're going to say the same thing over and over again. So to me, it's like, what's that workflow for once they go in for my outreach? Then what's the workflow for when they say yes? I want them to have a good experience, right? Like that's a big thing. I'm also a guest on a lot of different podcasts as well, too. So that's always the thing that I'm very keen on. Like, this was not a good experience for me. I don't know what we're going to talk about. I don't know where the link is. I don't know all of these things. So I think of like my guest experience next. Once they have that, I want them to have like a very good experience. I think the tip that I have learned is if you have a structure, I have a conversation outline because I will go down rabbit holes unless I don't, right? So I have a standard form that I send out, not that form, but I have a standard sheet that I send out to people with questions specifically of where the direction that I want to take out. And I sent it to them 24 hours before the podcast. Sometimes it'll be a week before, but sometimes I find that 24 hours is really great because we're all really busy and it's tough to find that one email and be like, okay, what were we talking about? Who is this? What did I commit to? So identifying the workflows for outreach, then the workflow for like once you have that guest, and ensuring that they have a really positive experience. Those are like my takeaways from there. And then during the podcast, I think the biggest thing that I've learned is to have fun in it, be in the moment and truly listen. And you're doing a really great job of this because now I also like listen to critique this, but like when you are hosting something, you are in charge of the journey for the listener. So I am going to be long winded. You being able to recap what all of the words that I've said because I'm so loquacious can be for the listener ensures that they are following the path of like the conversation as you want them. So I think like as a podcast host, you really are the director of that. And I practice a lot. I practice a lot. I practice a lot in other conversations that are not podcasts to be able to do that. So that when I get
Yeah.
on the podcast, it's like it's going to take time. So like that's the big thing as well too. It takes time. That's why I say like that advice of like do it for a year is really huge because it's gonna take time. I don't even want to listen to the first podcast that I did for Let's Talk Marketing, and not because of the guest. Okay, like she was wonderful, but like the me then is not the me now. Like
Which is good, right?
yeah, I mean, like, you get
Yeah.
into a different rhythm, so I think kind of just knowing that, and then, like, the post recording workflow is the thing that you have to be able to set up, and that to me is still just kind of that work in progress. I used to have podcast producers, I produce them all now and have, again, like, an editor, but, like, what does that actually mean, and what do I wanna do, and how do I amplify it? There's a lot of time that it takes to set up those processes. So I've learned a lot, but and the key is like workflows, templates, automation, good experience, give yourself grace and have some fun, you know?
Yeah. I also love the advice to listen actively. I think hosting a podcast, active listening is like not mentioned that often by podcast hosts, but I think it's probably
Yeah.
the most important thing in actually like being the host of a podcast. So not about the whole production side, but hosting the podcast. It's and not that many people do it, I feel like. As
No.
So when I started this podcast specifically, I had a list of questions. And I don't have a list of questions anymore because I noticed that for me personally, I host better podcasts when I don't have a list of questions prepared because I have to listen. I have to actively listen because if I
Yeah.
lose the conversation, if I'm not listening to you anymore, I don't have a question to ask next.
Yeah.
So there will be an awkward pause. And that has happened in the past to me, obviously, and we edit it
Yeah. Yeah.
out and it's fine. But just that habit and I need them to kind of pressure to, okay, I need to listen actively. And I also like it. I personally like it. And
Yeah.
I feel that for me, my content gets better that way because
Absolutely.
I will have the space to ask follow-up questions. And it's just for me more natural. And I also love that you mentioned that you practiced in non-podcast conversations. So just like
All the
normal
time.
conversations. That's so smart.
It's also very annoying to the people around me, I'm sure of it. Like, I've had family members be like, "I'm not on your podcast right now." And I'm like, "I'm
I've had
sorry, I just
friends say
go
that
into."
too.
Yeah, I mean, like, I just go into that mode, but you find that, like, you kind of naturally do that. It is like the whole Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours. My whole like, if I wanna be good at this. That's the thing too. I really wanna be good at this. I know that I'm not fully baked as far as, like, being a podcast host, but like to be able to be on this side of the mic and that side of the mic is going to make me better as a podcast host. So this is actually like one of my goals this year is like I want to be on other people's podcasts as well too, to not only make those connections, but to be able to sit on this side as well too and learn how I can be a better host, right? Like because I think that I'm learning from other hosts. What's your process? What's your workflow? What is it? What is
Yeah.
like from the background to the mic to the questions to the not questions, right? So I think
Yeah.
there's so much to learn. And the active listening, obsessed with the fact that you said active listening because it's true. We don't talk about it enough. It is the key to be able to ask those follow-up questions. If I'm not actively listening, I don't know what it is that I want to ask next. And I think like I do craft questions, but it again, for me, the questions are crafted so that I stay within the guardrails. But what I also found is the questions help the guest feel comfortable. Because again, remember I said, like, what's this guest experience?
Mhm.
Sometimes people just want to know what it is they're going to be talking about so that they can
Yeah.
feel prepared and they feel comfortable. And as a podcast host, I think like that's the responsibility too, right? Like not
Yeah.
only are you in charge of like keeping the cadence, right? And telling the story, not only are you in charge of actively listening, but you're like in charge of ensuring that this guest feels comfortable enough to maybe go into places that they didn't think that they would be comfortable with if you had given them those questions beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also really depends on who your guest is, right?
Yes.
So knowing your guest, knowing your listeners, it's so important. And in my case, I think it's probably also a little bit different. I have it very easy because I interview podcasters. So they always have a mic, they have the good lighting, they know, they're usually very comfortable behind the mic.
Yeah.
So, like it's easy in that
It's
sense
true.
for
It's
sure.
true. I mean, you set yourself up for success. You're right. If I wasn't
Yeah.
comfortable to be talking about any subject, I was like, drop me in. Let's not talk
Yeah,
about politics. I
exactly.
think that's the one thing that I'm like, not hard pass or history. Politics and history. These
Yeah.
are two things I don't feel comfortable talking about.
That's understandable. Katja, you had so many good tips, advice. I love hearing about your podcast journey today. Can you tell us where people can find Let's Talk Marketing so that they can give it a listen and yeah, follow the podcast?
Absolutely. And I hope that you put these links in the show notes as well too. But you can
Yeah.
listen to the Let's Talk Marketing podcast on Apple and Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. It is audio video, so definitely look us up on YouTube as well too. Starting TikTok this year as
Oh,
well for
exciting.
promotions on the clip. So take a look at. Oh, and then the final one, LinkedIn. I can't believe I forgot that. So that's the OG social platform for amplification. I've got the Let's Talk Marketing podcast page. So give us a follow there. Definitely listen to the podcast. I want to hear what everybody thinks. Good, bad, the ugly. Well, I don't know. Be nice. Keep it nice.
Not too ugly, please.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, let's edit the ugly part out.
Yes, we will also add all the links to the show notes. So when you're listening, click those links. Make sure to give the podcast a listen. Katya, thank you again for being on the show. It was amazing having you here.
Thank you so much.
All right, that's it for today's episode. Need some help to get your podcast off the ground? Not sure where to start and what to focus on? Go to thepodcastbabes.com to schedule a call and learn more about our podcast launch and production services. See you next week.